with. But next, let's consider the emotional anguish that came with this, which might be worse. Lepers were considered unclean by the Jewish law. They weren't just battling a disease. I want you guys to understand this. They were not just battling some disease. They were dealing with rejection. They were cast out of their homes. They were cast out of their villages. They were cast away from their families. Think about this on Thanksgiving. Lepers couldn't hug their children. They couldn't kiss their spouse. They couldn't sit at a table with their loved ones and enjoy a meal. Imagine the loneliness of watching your family from a distance and never being able to go near them. That's what lepers dealt with. And this is kind of closely tied to that, but consider the social isolation. We think back at 2020. They lived in permanent quarantine. Permanent. The law of Moses in Leviticus 13 required for them to live outside the camp or outside the city. They had to shout everywhere they go. Imagine this. You have some condition, and everywhere you go, you've got to shout, unclean, unclean, everywhere you go. I think of people that have STDs. Imagine if that was the treatment for that. It was so known, and yet everywhere you go, unclean, unclean. It's humiliating. These people dealt with humiliating circumstances. They had to warn people because of the contagious nature of leprosy everywhere they went. They had to shout, unclean, unclean. Can you imagine the shame of announcing your own brokenness every single day, everywhere you went? Everywhere you went, you had to announce, I'm unclean. Stay away from me. I can't go near my family. I have this condition. It'll never be healed. Now, if that's not bad enough, remember that oftentimes these were Jews. I mean, the law of Moses was speaking specifically to the people of Israel. Consider the spiritual separation. Lepers were not allowed to enter the temple or to participate in corporate worship. They were seen as cursed by God in the first century. They were cut off not just from society, but from the very presence of God. To be a leper was to live under this constant shadow of rejection. Not only to people, but it was believed to God himself. What they were, and I want you guys to think about this, they were walking embodiments of alienation. Their disease marked them as unfit for worship, unfit for fellowship, unworthy of worship, and unwelcomed in the place where God's presence dwelled. Imagine the hopelessness of being told day after day that your condition made you unclean. Not just in your body, but in your soul. For people whose entire identity was wrapped up in being part of God's covenant community, this separation was more than physical. This was spiritual exile. Having leprosy was spiritual exile.